Kollumbungara is an extinct volcano on the western fringe of the Solomon Islands. Its peak rises almost 1,800 metres into the clouds. It's beautiful and remote. The area is famous for hardwood timber, diving and highly productive fishing grounds. It also has a deep-water harbour and an airstrip, assets China is coveting in its expansion across the Pacific. Tonight on Four Corners, we reveal how China is seeking to buy this strategically important island in an effort to cement its growing position across the Solomons. And we expose how Chinese money is being used by Prime Minister Manessa Sogavare to maintain power in this volatile country off Australia's northeastern coast.
This is world-class plantation. We're actually operating without using any chemical at all in our plantations. We also protect our environment just to making sure our birds, our creatures, everything out there works actually alive.
Pendrin Naftali oversees the forestry operations on Kollumbungara and says it's the only logging company in the Solomons certified internationally for its sustainable practices.
I'm a Solomon Islander, and to actually have a company working on my island, on Solomon Islands, is great stuff. And I would suggest if any government of the day could actually replicate what we are doing, that would make Solomon Islands economically strong in a forestry sector.
Edwin Schramm is the general manager of the plantation. How many people do you employ here?
So we have 200 permanent employees across the various departments, being human resources, research, nursery, forestry, and so on. And then we have between 1,200 to 2,000 independent contractors, silvicultural contractors and harvesting contractors. So we harvest about 100,000 cubic meters a year. Here we have the clinic on the right. It's a medical clinic.
Yep.
Local, so staff and people on the island living here can attend the clinic. And here we have the primary and secondary school on the right-hand side.
And you guys run this as well?
We house the teachers who teach the children. So we have up to 300 children around here at the school every day.
The plantation is owned by private Taiwanese and Australian shareholders in conjunction with the Solomon Islands government. Border closures due to COVID-19 have left the company vulnerable. They haven't exported any logs in 15 months. With a deep-water port, protected harbour and World War II airstrip, the plantation has attracted attention from its largest customer, China. How good is this port here, and tell us about it?
It's exceptionally deep. You probably find that it's up to 40, 50 meters deep as you approach the wharf. The wharf itself, the depth alongside this wharf is 20 meters, which is quite remarkable, given that it's a natural deep-water port. So it's a really, really well-suited natural port for big vessels to come in and berth.
Four Corners can reveal China Forestry Group, a state-owned enterprise, is in talks to buy the plantation. That would give it control over 14,000 hectares of hardwood forests and the island's key infrastructure. A Chinese delegation visited Columbunga to inspect the island and pointedly asked how deep's the water and how long's the wharf. We're told they paid almost no attention to the trees.
I think this plantation, KFPL, is one of the unique plantations that we have around not only the Pacific, but maybe the world. As much as possible, we want to keep it that way because we want to keep it for our children, our children's children, and, the future generation.
Redley Vargo leads a group of traditional landowners who work closely with the plantation.
Our worry would be to have a company that is here and they just wipe out all the investments and all these plantations. That would be our worry.
Do Chinese forestry companies have a good reputation in the Solomon Islands?
They are not they are doing more harm to our forest than good. So I wouldn't say that about them.
Chinese companies have a reputation for bringing in their own labour. Mm-hmm. Is that one of your concerns?
I think that's one of our main concerns because overall we have always had our local labourers coming in, local people coming in to contribute into the labour force of this company. And for us to see our people being sidelined in this way is going to be devastating and it's going to be morally wrong, I think.
As a deal to sell the Columbunga plantation moved ahead, members of the board wrote to the Australian government about the risk and strategic threats posed by any sale. The letter urged Canberra to step in and buy the plantation to boost ties with Solomon Islands and prevent China taking control of the port and airstrip and establishing a base. Foreign Minister Penny Wong's office told Four Corners Australia is continuing to engage with the plantation owners, not ruling out an intervention.
Solomon Islands sits across key sea lines of communication and also across key undersea cables as well. So for those reasons, there is deep concern in Australia that any kind of foreign force in Solomons would present a direct security threat to Australia.
Dr. Anna Poles knows the Solomons intimately. As a Pacific security expert, she has closely followed China's push into the region.
They were building a whole series of demountables.
She says China's commercial facilities could be used in the future to house military assets.
How do you view the Chinese commercial interests with Beijing's broader strategic interest? How do those two fit together?
We do know that Chinese companies are often the vanguard of Beijing's state interests in countries and regions. And so in the case of Solomon Islands, certainly the Chinese commercial network is incredibly useful for Beijing in its pursuit of its strategic interests in Solomon Islands and in the region more broadly.
Columbunga sits at the heart of Western Province, a resource-rich part of the Solomons.
What can I say? In terms of tourism, it's probably one of the best places to go. I always say that, If you want to come over to the Solomons, you're not in Solomons until you visit the West. Blue ocean, reefs, good fishing, and a lot of good seafood. There is a story that he has some involvement.
Silas Tausinger has been an MP in the tourist destination of Munda for 12 years. During that time, he's become worried about the increasing Chinese interest in his electorate.
It is concerning. One of my biggest concerns is how much says the spillover effects of that to the local people. How much employment is going to go back to the locals? I've heard stories from friends and some of my relatives that are from Guadalcanal that a lot of the workers now are coming from China, even the basic truck drivers, excavator operators.
The Chinese are not hiding their ambition in the country's west. Ambassador Li Ming recently handed over fishing boats, engines and eskies to locals on Morovo Island, accompanied by this pledge.
China will continue to support Western Province. China will continue to support Solomon Islands.
I'm concerned about China moving to the West because I'm looking at the infrastructure we have in the West. If they start having a foothold in there, if we are unable to pay back debts, as a West, as a province, what do we have in terms of resources that they would want so they'll be able to repay those debts that we have? It's not only in the West. I think generally as the whole country, it's quite worrying.
In Munda, a Chinese company is resurfacing the runway at the airport and building a new international terminal. Not that they were keen for us to film it.
This is not public, yes. This is a private building.
But we're just filming from a public road, we're allowed to do that?
Not allowed, sorry.
Says who?
Not allowed, sorry. If you photo here, this is my logo, my company logo. And
what's wrong with photographing that?
Not allowed. I say again.
Who says we're not allowed?
Not allowed. Okay.
According to who, we're not allowed?
Okay, I will say again. Not allowed. I say again, not allowed. Okay. 李总，安排人过来那个现场，他们又来现场拍。啊，跟他们来应。OK， 他们昨天又安排人过来那个现场拍。Not allowed. OK， 把他那个摄像机把它盖住。
Okay. We'll stop filming. Okay. It's fine.
Please stop.
Okay. Don't touch the camera. Yeah. Don't touch the camera.
In the capital Honiara, China's presence is impossible to ignore. Just coming past the Chinese embassy now, and as you can see, it towers over everything else. Out towards the airport is a stadium China's building for next year's Pacific Games, which features a giant billboard trumpeting Beijing's contribution. Here on the street, you even see garbage trucks driving around, which feature China Aid logos on their side. China's push into the Solomons is only possible after Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare decided to switch the country's diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing in September 2019. He was criticised for not consulting widely before making the move, creating resentment across the country.
Taiwan has been with us for a long time. It built a hospital and a number of assistance to all the communities. So they have a years of relationship with them. It has meant that under the way that they were sent off, not even a thank you note.
As opposition to the China switch grew in the second half of last year, the Prime Minister was scrambling to keep his government together. A vote of no confidence was looming in Parliament.
Honourable Prime Minister, please. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Now, Four Corners can reveal the full details of how a Chinese slush fund kept Sogavare in power. It paid MPs who supported the Prime Minister.
I've obtained a document here. I want to show it to you. Can you give us your impressions of this?
Okay, this document was actually a document, a funding that were approved for the members and ministers, backbenchers and ministers from the government. I think it was in August that was approved. All were going to receive 200,000 each.
So members of the Sogavare's government?
Yeah.
At the time, Silas Tausinger was part of the Sogavare government, and so his name was on a list of MPs who received the money, around 34,000 Australian dollars each. Money coming directly from the Chinese embassy in Honiara.
So you're saying that the Member of Parliament can actually use this money for whatever they like?
They like, yeah. Yes. It's upon their discretion. It's you know, if they say school fees, if they say build a school or whatever with it, it doesn't matter. They have a direct discretion what they do with it.
The Prime Minister failed to respond to this allegation. Away from Parliament, anger over Sogavare's leadership grew, in part due to the switch to China. 3 months later, riots erupted on the streets of the capital. Ruth Lilakula, a former cabinet secretary who now runs the Solomon Islands arm of Transparency International, watched the unrest from her balcony.
So what could you see from your balcony here?
Just thick smoke going everywhere. And people running from everywhere as soon as the buildings caught fire.
What sort of things were they taking?
They were taking food, they were taking sensors, they were taking TVs, whatever else they can get into their own hands, and generators, all the power tools. This is what they were taking with them. Then there's a small group of people, and they touch the buildings. And when Island Enterprise went up in flames, because it's got gases and all of that, it's like a war zone with things exploding everywhere. So it was scary.
Tell us how it made you feel having your community burn.
It broke my heart.
Ruth Lilakula said it could have all been avoided if the Prime Minister had met with protesters.
They demand to meet with him, started in August, September, and he just said no, no, no. So it would not have averted the rioting and the looting. If he had met with them the first time that they wanted to be listened to, we would not have ended up where we are.
The rioters targeted Chinese-owned businesses. In December, still fearing for the survival of his government, Sogavare again activated the Chinese slush fund. This time, loyal MPs received 44,000 Australian dollars each. And the Prime Minister survived a no-confidence motion.
This is the revised copy that was paid out after the vote of no confidence. As you obviously seen, my name was crossed out.
Why was your name crossed out?
Oh yeah, because I crossed over, I resigned from government and walked over and joined the opposition.
So you didn't get any money?
No. I knew that I was going to get it, but it wasn't the reason I was going to stay for the money.
Do you think this money helps the Prime Minister stay in power?
Well, he's stayed in power, hasn't he? Yeah, so I think he does.
A letter obtained by Four Corners shows the first payment schedule was signed by the Prime Minister and said the Chinese embassy had been consulted on this additional support and consented to the money being released. In the end, nearly 3 million Australian dollars provided by China was paid to government MPs.
This is corruption, because all this money, none of it anybody is benefiting from. These are personal benefits to these listed members of parliament in this list.
We showed the same list to Ruth Lilakula from Transparency International.
And this tells me that China is keeping this government together.
Four Corners emailed detailed questions about these allegations to the Prime Minister's office and followed up with phone calls and texts. We received no response. The riots forced Prime Minister Sogavare to turn to Canberra for help. Within 24 hours, Australian boots were on the ground. They remain in the country today.
Prime Minister Sogavare was obviously deeply concerned about November riots because he was very much the target of those. And the deep-seated frustration felt by many in Solomon Islands about poor, inequitable and unfair development in Solomon Islands.
China also offered to help and later sent in riot gear and police trainers, a clear upgrade of its relationship with Honiara. Then in March this year, a draft security pact, which no one had anticipated, was made public.
A number of these islands...
Anna Poles was one of the first people to reveal its contents and raise concerns it could lead to a Chinese military presence in the Solomons.
I received it from a concerned individual in Solomon Islands and was... Initially, at that time, it hadn't actually been verified, but it was certainly concerning to read, and I was certainly concerned about the ambitious nature of it and the ambiguous nature of it as well.
What would any Chinese military presence potentially look like in the Solomons?
Certainly the security deal made reference to the provision of logistical support and material assets in Solomon Islands to support Chinese naval ship visits to Solomon Islands. And that, of course, raised concerns about the potential for a base. There are concerns that this agreement would allow for Chinese police and military personnel to be deployed in order to maintain social order or in response to some type of humanitarian assistance or to protect Chinese infrastructure.
The Solomon Islands be one of your first...
The signing of the security deal dominated the early weeks of the Australian election campaign.
Is it a failure of your Pacific Step Up program?
No, no, absolutely not. This is no surprise to us. It may be a surprise to the Labor Party, but it's not a surprise to us.
What I would say is this. This represents the worst failure for Australian foreign policy in the Pacific since the end of World War II.
By July, at a meeting in Fiji, Sogavare assured the new Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, that Beijing won't be allowed to establish a military base in the Solomons.
Welcome. How are you? Very well.
But despite a friendly meeting, not everyone is convinced.
Do you think China does want to establish a military base in the Solomon Islands?
I think they would want to. Strategically, given the expansion they're doing out of the Pacific, I think they would want to. But given that the international media and the pressure from the Solomon Islands people themselves would putting pressure on the government, so they are trying to avoid it at the moment, But I hope they don't.
Beijing's intentions were revealed in a recently leaked letter from a Chinese defence contractor written in 2020. It showed Chinese state-owned corporations attempting to lease land in Isabel Province to develop naval and infrastructure projects for the People's Liberation Army Navy.
There's been a lot of talk in Australia about China establishing a military base in the Solomon Islands. Do you think Australia should be worried by that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Australia should be worried about it. Solomon Islands is a country that has no military background. Who are we trying to protect ourselves from? Historically, we don't have a military, and then to suggest that we should have another country coming in here as a security partner in terms to even suggest the idea of having to build a military base. Who are we building a military base for? Not for, but against. Who are our enemies?
Manasseh Sogavare has come to dominate Solomon Islands politics over the last 25 years. He is a deeply religious, combative politician who has been Prime Minister 4 times.
He's the most significant Prime Minister of his generation. He will be remembered as a very significant figure, and most recently his dealings with China, I think, have made him a far more significant Pacific leader than he ever was when he first started.
A controversial figure?
Yes, he is controversial because he takes no prisoners along the way. Is not your typical Seventh-day Adventist. Neither is he a typical Solomon Islander. There are certain things about the way that he behaves, particularly his yelling in Parliament, which certainly would not be acceptable for a customary leader of any Solomon Island society.
You knew Sogavare as a young man. What was your impression of him?
Yes, I know Sogavare as a young man. My impression of him is that he is a potential leader of the country and he would make a very good politician. Understanding has a lots of very good ideas about how to develop Solomon Islands and all of this. And I also encourage him to stand and all of this because I'm old, so I do these kind of things.
How do you think he is now as a leader?
Now as a leader, we don't recognize him anymore.
Sogavare's complicated relationship with Canberra dates back to Australia's leadership of the Regional Assistance Mission to Solomon Islands, known as RAMSI, between 2003 and 2017. Nicholas Koppel headed the mission for 3 years.
RAMSI was deployed because Solomon Islands had fallen into a state of lawlessness. It was approaching a failed state, but it was invited in by the government of Solomon Islands with the backing of the Parliament of Solomons through the Pacific Islands Forum. And it came in initially with a very clear mandate to restore law and order, but also to rebuild the finances of the country and rebuild a lot of the government institutions which had been effectively run down or destroyed during the period of the tensions.
Been highly critical of RAMSI in the past. Are you still critical of them, or how do you feel about
having a foreign military and bureaucratic presence sat uncomfortably with Sogavare.
When RAMSI came in, they address a lot of things, but there are a lot of issues that are still yet to be addressed, and that is the underlying issues that caused this country to collapse in year 2000.
He's a great nationalist, and he really felt that in allowing RAMSI in, the Solomon Parliament would be losing its role, and he was very worried about that. And because Australia always financed and provided the coordinators for RAMSI, it was very much an Australian operation, so he was suspicious of that. He doesn't have any strong Australian connections like going to school or doing a university degree or something like that. So he doesn't have that background with Australia.
It was an Australian Federal Police raid on his prime ministerial office which tipped the relationship over the edge.
The row between the Solomons and Australia is set to deepen.
The raid on Prime Minister Sogavare's office took place in 2006. It was in pursuit of a case against the Attorney General of Solomon Islands at the time, a man by the name of Julian Motti. There were some historical allegations or charges against him, and the Australian Federal Police were keen to get evidence which would lead to his conviction.
Although there was a warrant, the way the search was conducted has infuriated the government.
It involved Australian police breaking into the office of the Prime Minister of Solomon Islands to retrieve a fax machine, which they believe would contain evidence which would be useful in their inquiries. And the Prime Minister of Solomon Islands took a particular outrage at this.
Do you think that was a mistake?
With the benefit of hindsight, I think it's, as I say, was a disproportionate response and an unnecessary risk.
It's a humiliation for a Prime Minister to have his office raided by representatives of a foreign police force. And Sogavari, I think, did have his views coloured by Ramsay generally, because it was an erosion of nationalism.
On National Day in the Solomon Islands, the Prime Minister called for unity in challenging times.
I thank you all for responding positively to my invitation to this Thanksgiving service, where we mark the 44th anniversary of our independence.
Watching on was China's ambassador, Li Ming, seated next to Australia's High Commissioner, Lachlan Strawn.
But that is the nature of relationship, as we heard.
Sogavari finished with a pointed acknowledgement.
We welcome, of course, the new addition to our team of development partners, the People's Republic of China, who have already demonstrated their genuine intention to be a worthy partner in the development of our country in less than 3 years of our relationship. And I thank all of you on behalf of a grateful country and people.
The Prime Minister refused our repeated requests for an interview, but we were promised he'd answer a few questions before he left.
Prime Minister, Angus Grigg from Four Corners. Have you got time for a quick chat? Your press sec just said you were happy to have a chat. Can you give us a quick chat now? Is your thanks of China a rebuke of Australia, Prime Minister?
Four Corners was later told by the Prime Minister's staff that he sees the issue of China's presence in the Solomons as water under the bridge. There was a key question I wanted to put to Sogavari.
We've discovered there are question marks over the Prime Minister's personal finances. Four Corners understands ANZ here in Honiara encouraged Mr Sogavari to take his business elsewhere following unexplained funds moving through his bank account.
The Solomon Islands is still the second poorest country in the Pacific. After 4 stints as Prime Minister, Sogavari has failed to meet the needs of his people.
There are times when you go to the central hospital, you have to buy gloves for them to deal with sick patients or your relatives. I've had to buy plasters because they don't have it. You have to buy supply and get it there because it does not exist in the hospital. There are times when there is no Panadol. My cousin walked in there, he rang me up and he walked in there at 12 o'clock. He had to wait because there's only one nurse there until 3 o'clock before they deal with him. By 10 o'clock, we took him out in a coffin. That's just how bad it is in that hospital because the government neglected.
Why do the politicians tolerate having a hospital so bad?
Solomon Island politicians don't get attended to inside the country. They go overseas for their medical need, checkup or whatever else they need, them and their families.
One industry which could deliver some much needed revenue for better government services is logging.
Hey, George.
I met with a former central bank official who told me why this isn't happening.
So you've been looking into the logging industry, have you?
Yeah, I do.
George Kasui was a senior bureaucrat who previously ran the Commerce Department in Honiara. He's investigated the huge underpayment of royalties by the logging industry and estimates the shortfall at around $500 million Australian dollars since 2009.
Do you think politicians are getting some of this money? Some of it's coming back to the politicians?
There's no way that you can get money from anyone except from the loggers. They have the money. They have the deep pocket to give anyone anything. And even if you ask any Solomon Islanders, only loggers got money. So most of the money which the government, the corrupt officials of the government access from the loggers.
The underpayment results from the government setting the price of logs from which royalties must be paid. But this price is well below what the logs are actually sold for on the world market. There's your lost royalties. The Solomon Islands Central Bank, Auditor General and IMF have warned about this lost revenue for decades.
Is what you're saying that the loggers pay some of this difference to the politicians, and that's a way for them to get money?
Well, the thing is that the amount of money that is lost and the amount of money that is moving around within and in the logging industry is a bit substantial. Therefore, they have a lot of money at their disposal to do anything.
And who owns these logging companies?
Most of them, few Malaysians, but most of them are Chinese companies. Few others, recent ones, they come as mining companies or loggers, and then they actually got mining licenses as well from nowhere. So they are the ones who are actually involved in the logging industry as well, mostly Chinese.
Do you think the logging industry is good for Solomon Islands?
No, it is not at all good for Solomon Islands, because it does not bring back what it left is devastated environments, but more than that it destroys the social fabric of every community. Brothers are fighting against brothers. Communities are no longer talking to each other.
Well, they pretty much own the country. The Ministry of Forestry is pretty much their bread and butter. People do know this, that every time a minister stands up to the logging companies, the minister automatically gets removed, or the commissioner, because the logging company pretty much owns the Ministry of Forestry.
George Kasui, now an advisor to the opposition, says plantations, like the one we visited on Kolonbungara, are a better model for the Solomons.
I think Kolonbungara is a bit different from what the logging industry here in the Solomons is doing. Kolonbungara, to me, they operated on a sort of like a sustainable sort of forestry and reforestation, where they cut trees and they have to replant it as well. So that's what is happening there.
Businessman Peter Lewis understands how money, politics and China have converged in the Solomons. He was forced to walk away from a lucrative bauxite mine in Tuamotu province after the licence was unexpectedly cancelled by the mines minister.
We'd spent a lot of money, I think to the tune of about $8 million, digging holes and getting lab tests and setting up programs for mining. So we'd spent a lot of time and money.
The matter ended up in the local courts.
What do you think was happening in the background?
I think that the minister and the powers that be, spurred on by the Chinese who wanted to get their hands on our deposit, the judges were being told, mess this around, stall it, which they did very effectively. 2 years later and 200 grand Aussie, we finally got to the appeals court, which is 3 foreign judges who, in the matter of 5 minutes, completely dismissed his arguments. So we won hands down. Problem was, they then referred it back to the mines department to reconsider our application, and that's when we threw it up. Well, you know, it's going to happen all over again. You can guarantee it. So we decided then to shut it down and walk away.
Did you ever get a sense that the Chinese were operating in the background?
More than that, I've actually cited the minutes of the mines, I think it's called the Mines Council, and they are the ultimate body in the mines area. And when our matter came up, I was showing the minutes, And there it was in black and white. One of the members said, "I thought we'd already given this to X, the Chinese company." It's in the minutes of the Mines Council.
Another industry China is trying to control is telecommunications. It's pushing to build around 160 mobile phone towers across the Solomons. Chinese tech giant Huawei would supply the equipment, funded in part by a loan of $55 million from Beijing. Experts worry it will leave the country vulnerable.
I've just received a report written by consulting firm KPMG, which says the financial returns on the Huawei proposal have been significantly overstated, and the 3-year construction period is unrealistic. Now, experts we've spoken to say the country doesn't need that many towers. They fear it will be unable to repay the debt, and some even worry it could bankrupt Solomon Telecom.
It concerns me because it is in whose interest? Is that really the infrastructure that Solomon Island needs? That's the question. And who is it being built for? Is it built for us Solomon Islands, or is it built for China's interest? How much is it? And how are we going to pay it back? Will our children be made poorer and poorer by having to pay back these things that they are taking on?
Huawei's presence has stoked security concerns after it was banned from rolling out new networks in the US and Australia. Canberra has agreed to fund 6 towers across some of the most remote parts of the Solomons.
Thank you, Thomas Linton. Good afternoon to you and good afternoon to all the listeners below me. Wherever you start listening this for Sunday afternoon, you're with SIBC, the voice of the nation.
Okay, good afternoon once again, good listeners. Wherever you listen, Kamleem, Lord, this is a beautiful Sunday afternoon.
Ruth Lilakula is working with a group of young people raising awareness about corruption and government secrecy.
We're talking about security.
The focus of today's radio program is the security pact with China.
Under Article 5, we talk about confidentiality. Yeah?
Young people are fast becoming an influential bloc in the Solomons. This is where the next generation of leaders will come from.
This is why youth empowerment is important. These same youths that burn down the city are the same youths that can help rebuild our city, are the same youths that can build our city, build our country. So as leaders and
the young people that I come to interact with through my work gives me hope, because they want to do something, they want to speak up. So giving them avenue to do that is kind of my commitment, so that they can map out a better future for themselves.
There are deep fears about where this relationship with China could lead and what it means for future generations.
My hopes for the future has to be positive, because I live here. God did not give me any other place. This is the country it gave me. So I have to be positive.
From my standpoint, we have become a banana republic pretty much.
Do you think the Solomon Islands is a failed state?
We're pretty much heading in that direction. Given the amount of foreign forces that are within the country, you can almost suggest that we are pretty much on the road to a failed state, you know?
What does the future look like for you and for this country?
I still have hope. As a young politician, I still believe that we can turn things around and build a better Solomon Islands than what we already experienced in the last 20 years.